I'd like to call the meeting to order, the executive committee. The second item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as outlined in front of you?
Motion approved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Get that? Okay. All in favor of the approval of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, approval of the prior meeting minutes. And that would be from May 22nd, 2014. You have those in your packet. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any?
Motion to approve.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay. Important legislation. Brian?
No, should those two words go together in a sentence?
They do in this case.
Yeah.
In this case, they do.
Well, the Lanier has been very close to things, and you can just really appreciate how helpful his relationships and ability to interpret things is in situations like this. He's going to talk to us 5 o'clock tonight. So we'll have the appropriations is meeting again today at the House, and the Senate. What Senate committee is meeting today? Forget. The long and the short of it, and we'll talk about there was a bill originally, I guess, House 1181, which was originally called, I don't know, Medicaid Reform Bill, and then it reappeared as the Medicaid Modernization Bill. Very, very much reduced in a very interesting section, Section 10, and this is in your, I guess it's in the big board packet, right? And actually, we have version 1, and we have version 2 for you. So it's a regular civics lesson here, or lesson in politics, how legislation, how language changes over time with things. We got pretty excited over that because it was, the House's attempt to deal with Medicaid reform outside of the budget in a separate piece of legislation, different from the Senate. And had some interesting features in it, not the least of which was in Section 10, the use of a demonstration project for full capitation for Medicaid by, well, and there was only one MCO with 5 years of experience under the waiver, and that's Cardinal. So they would have, under this, and you can read Section 10 if we got it. If you want to take a look at that rather than me trying to recite it. Basically, they would have been fully capitated for health and behavioral health for everybody in the C waiver and in an ICF. And, just to give you some idea of the scope of that, for them that'd be about 4,000 people. For us it'd be about 2,000 people. They were the only ones eligible. We had a little discussion about whether or not that eligibility might be expanded by reducing the number of years, and over the last weekend and the end of last week, and I guess it's fair to say that it seemed best to let the language stay as it was, and people understand our interest, especially with that population, because of some work we're doing. This goes into kind of a whole other area, an IDD help home we're working on with Jeff Hack and folks at Mayhack, and to some extent we would be with CCNC. So it was really kind of a natural fit for us, but we don't have to introduce any more risks trying to change language now. But I was able to have a conversation with folks about that, and well received, but probably just a little too difficult to go messing around with it now. Long and the short of it is that, and it's funny, I think I've sent out 13 or 14 House members on appropriations from our catchment area. A lot of folks. I sent them emails, got nice responses from several, just to let them know about that piece of legislation, and in fact, interest in an amendment to it that would have been more, provided a little more substance around the role of LME and MCOs going forward. Really just one sentence. But it doesn't look like anybody's going to be taking up any Medicaid reform legislation from the sounds of it. And they're just trying to do whatever they can do to get the budget done. I'm not going to say that I completely understand the tactic. I don't mean it in a bad way, but the way the House is approaching, what's called the mini budget. Lanier can talk about that later this evening. And maybe you've read some articles about it. No language in any place about MCO regions. There was in the Medicaid modernization legislation. The only reference there, however, was to the regions, to the networks, the geography of CCNC regions. But you just see how things twirl around. And a lot of things you worry about today are gone tomorrow. Short session, very hectic. They're just trying to do whatever they can do with the budget and get out of there. And like I said, we'll hear more from a year later on. So if you have any questions, I will save them for later. Okay?
Good.
You just read that legislation, that House bill, the second version. I mean, that's well, it got a lot of attention over a short period of time. Let's put it that way. So, the good part about that is it gives us, me the ability to have discussions with Mission and other partners on the whole future of our region. So, there's silver
It's
lining.
really a lot different, Brian, than what came out of the census, And it's
Sure
really,
is.
surprisingly, some parts good, some parts not so good. Just like any other bill.
Well, at least there's some substance to it. It's not just no,
Right.
everything. Number 5, relocation planning. We've been working, we've had this idea for a while. It's just been hard to get it up on the deck. The building we're in here in Nashville on Biltmore is, because of its location and many of the features of the building, is so much better suited for a treatment facility than an office building. It's just a no-brainer. It's had an interesting history where it's probably been that for a number of years and foot back and forth. The proximity to Mission, the interest in having additional functionality at the facility-based crisis program that RHA runs here in Asheville. All the huge demand that Mission Hospital sees in their ED. And when I say huge demand, we're talking, I think, the last couple of months have been over 400 presentations in a month. For what I guess you could consider, and again, the definitions of these things are always probably open to interpretation, but psychiatric or substance abuse related crises of some sort. 400, I think 425 in a month. Yeah. So, the interest in having a 24/7 assessment, drop-off, full-blown walk-in with, various levels of care, what we do would be to combine an outpatient center, our comprehensive care center model, where there'd be walk-in and treatment available, and also the facility-based crisis, where, again, we're really talking 24/7 now, so that could become the new emergency room, let's just say, the new psychiatric emergency room. That would be the goal. And everybody likes that idea, let me tell you. Including us. It's just hard to think of,
How many of them can we do?
how many of,
Those units?
well, we got a plan. We got some good news. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder for later.
You're gonna make us wait.
Should we make them wait? We did get some good news about all of them. Just, I don't know, about 11
I
o'clock.
think that could be.
Huh? All right. And we've got another, project, let's just say of a similar scope that, you have to talk about in a close second. But this is exactly what everybody would want. County loves it, Mission loves it, we realize it's the right thing to do, it's just a matter of getting organized. And financing it, our best option currently is at Ridgefield, which is kind of a office, health-related office complex south of 40. Folks know where that is. Is it on, what's that road? Hendersonville Road?
You know where Ridgeville is?
Yeah.
That's Brevard Road.
Brevard Road, I'm sorry.
Either behind the shopping center.
Right.
It was Allen Hospital.
Mhm.
Biltmore Square where the Allen Hospital.
The old mall.
One of the original malls.
They were key places. Okay, gotcha.
That's a very nice area out there too, Brian.
Well, we have no
And
other way.
equally accessible to the interstate for any stop traveling, so, that's great.
We bring we have a footprint that Randy Cunningham worked on for us. Christina's been working this really hard to try to get greater finality to a floor plan so we can get cost and then terms figured out. So, any other questions, happy to respond to. Normally this would be a gigantic, project we spend a lot of time talking about. It's just one of several. So, any questions? And people can take a look at that.
Where is that at?
Pardon me?
Where's that at?
Well, you know where the old mall is? On
Biltmore's 20.
Biltmore's, not
Biltmore
Biltmore Park.
Biltmore Square. One that's
Square.
gonna be down.
It's right down, behind there, there's a whole, I don't know, it's like a complex.
You know where the Kmart is up there?
Yeah. Okay.
Turn right there beside the Kmart.
So that's that. Western Regional Partnership. And the budget. Well, of course, the acid test was what was going to be in legislation, right? And I haven't seen any yet. Language in legislation, so I think that's caused a little cooling off of things, at least for us. It's going to be important. There's going to be a CEO sort of retreat for half a day here in a week or two. That's going to have to kind of reestablish probably have to reestablish our relationships and motivation and timing on some things. That's the way I can put it. Now, we do have, again, we do continue to focus on things that make sense for us to do. And one of those is an agreement by the group for us to provide credentialing services for both CenterPoint and partners. And that's a big project, and we hope to be able to go live with that, I think, October 1st, right?
We're
Remember?
evaluating it in the close of business tomorrow with you
Okay.
to look at the workflow and how successful we can be. So either October 1st, and I'm pushing more toward November 1st right now and understanding the workload.
But my understanding is that the two partners have approved the budget.
That's correct.
They're not there before, so they've now approved the budget, so they're really.
Ready to go forward. So,
That's,
It's a big deal.
that is a big deal right there.
We should
It
celebrate
really
that.
is.
Yes.
That's a big deal right there.
it would be a good statement about our ability to do something that, and again, you just have to remind everybody, the fantasy that all of these things are, create huge savings, and no, it really doesn't. It really takes, I don't think it's until about year 2 or 3, really, where you could say, yeah, now we're creating savings. It's just the nature of these things, because there's such a upfit cost. That it takes a while to recover those costs and get to a point where you're really able to save dollars. It's a good idea. It'll be an improvement over the way all 3 of us do credentialing now. So even to compare what is being done to current practice, it's a, I would say, significant improvement. For some more than others. So,
I think it'll make it better for providers as well.
absolutely.
Much simpler, smoother process. That'll be the same regardless of which company they're dealing with. So I think that'll be a significant positive for the providers.
No reason why we couldn't market this, because it's completely scalable to other MCOs that have to do the same exact thing. I mean, that's the beauty of it. This is kind of one of those things that nobody's really crazy about doing. They're labor intensive. And again, as a single organization, you'd always be on the fence about how much investment you want to try to put into it to create a good, really good process based on the scale. So, this kind of solves that problem. So it has good potential into the future too.
You're right, handle compliance program.
I think that would be Ms. Hayes.
Okay. And what was that again? What did you say?
Can we grab it? So really, Fred actually gave me the wise suggestion to go over this in executive committee rather than making the full board have to go through all of this. But it's been 2 years since the board approved the compliance plan, and it really needs to be approved on an annual basis. So you all should have received it via email. Did everybody get a copy of it? It's a requirement of federal regulation as a Medicaid managed care organization that we have a written compliance plan. And that it has to have certain elements based on some guidance from the U.S. Office of Inspector General. So the Compliance Committee and I have pulled this document together. And essentially, the plan is the written description of your organization's compliance program as a whole. So this plan should describe what it is that Smoky Mountain does to ensure compliance within the organization, as well as a little bit of description in terms of how we ensure compliance by our providers. So if you look kind of through, I'm just gonna walk you through it real quickly. There's an introduction section that references the requirements and why we have to have it. And there's a section that kind of outlines the different components, and I'll go through those components really quickly. A compliance program has to have very specific kind of structure and governance. Every organization of our size, based on the amount of federal Medicaid dollars that we have to have a compliance committee. You have to have a compliance officer, and that's me. And we meet on a regular basis to discuss compliance issues. One of the key features that OIG requires for an organization of our size is that if there are compliance issues, that I can bring them directly to the board if I need to. I haven't seen anything that I've needed to do that with, but it is written into the plan and it's written into the bylaws that I could bring that directly to the board. And I think I used this in the compliance training, but I think an easy example of that would be in years past, you know, if Lisa had brought to me a concern about Tom McDevitt as the compliance officer could have then brought that to the board in closed session and discussed it. So that's kind of a good example of what a compliance officer can do to prevent issues.
I'm glad you use that as an example rather than anything like
It's the best example I can think of. So, the compliance committee has a charter that just kind of lists what the compliance committee does. We started meeting on a monthly basis. They were not meeting very regularly. We're now meeting monthly. It includes the chief medical officer, it includes our program integrity director, it includes our contract performance director, and those are the two individuals who have the most direct interaction with our providers in terms of provider monitoring. It includes our senior director of care coordination, our chief finance officer, and a number of other individuals. Smokey is also just about finished with the hiring of a risk manager. That'll be somebody whose job it will be to evaluate risk to the organization, conduct root cause analysis, do internal investigations, and that person will also be on the committee.
Will the board have access to, or will we know who the members of this compliance committee will be? Could you get them all?
Yes, and actually, I can tell you who they are. We've got the charter, is attachment, let's see, it's Appendix A. So the members are the risk manager, when that person's hired. Our privacy officer, who is Charlie Berry. Charlie's been the privacy officer for Smokey for many years. He's just super fantastic. We're really lucky to have him. The chief medical officer, Dr. Martin. Our security officer is George Scott. George was the MIS director for Western Highlands and is now the senior director here at Smokey. Fred as chief finance officer. Our senior director of quality integrity operations, so that's Julie Sinclair. Our senior director of human resources, that's Nancy. Because again, compliance is about internal compliance as well as external. Our senior director of provider network or designee, and Sean Jones, our provider network director, has designated that to Patty Wilson, who is our contract performance director. Our senior director of care coordination, and that's Rhonda Cox, and you all met her last month when she was doing her presentation. And then our program integrity director, Billy Graves. So those are the members of the compliance committee, and we are meeting regularly. And we'd be more than happy to share the minutes. The plan is that I will do a quarterly oral report to the board and an annual written report. Okay. We have some subcommittees for the compliance committee. We have a critical incident review committee, and that's led by Dr. Martin. And that is for the providers who have to file incident reports in the IRIS system, which is a state system. When you have a certain type of incident occur with a consumer that you're serving or in your facility, so a suicide attempt, any kind of violence or assault, or even if a consumer dies of natural causes while under treatment. All of those get reported in IRIS, and this committee meets and reviews to ensure that the provider's response to the incident is adequate, and that they've established if there was any issue with the provider, that they've taken steps to address it. We also have the Investigations PI Oversight Committee, and that committee is one that looks at all of our provider investigations that we have ongoing. So Smokey receives a fair number of complaints on any given day or week about the providers in our network, and we're required with our contract with the state to investigate them. So this is the committee where they meet to discuss the outcomes of those investigations and next steps. And then we have a provider sanctions committee, and that's where we decide what sanctions we might take against a particular provider. So those are the three committees that report up to.
Who is that information shared with? That,
The sanctions committee?
Yeah.
So the sanctions committee consists of myself, our senior director of provider network, Sean Jones, Julie Sinclair, our senior director for QIO, Rhonda Cox, our senior director for care coordination, and our chief medical officer. And we report that to ELT when we have made a decision to take an action against the provider. And the way we
And just as, oh, I'm sorry, I was going to say, and just as an FYI, one of the things we do also is we're updating some of our printed materials to make sure the corporate compliance number is on printed materials. It's on our website. The other thing that we have done that we probably will be updating soon, just as the plan is being updated, is we have posters that we have posted throughout all of our facilities, and that those posters were printed initially for providers, and they also had an electronic format to post in their offices so that any consumer could see that line listed. So we're trying to make sure that people have information about how they might report any kind of corporate compliance concern.
okay?
The next element that OIG requires is that an organization have written policies and procedures and standards of conduct. Smokey has over 300 written policies and procedures. One thing I'm excited about is that our QIO department worked really hard this year to implement a system called Policy Tech, and it's an online electronic management system of your policies. It notifies you when it's time to do an annual review, when the updates have happened, and then it notifies staff if a change to a policy or procedure has been made, and then the staff are required to go in, read it, check a box that they've read it and understood the change to the policy. So it's a really great system. Then we also, of course, have a code of ethics and conduct. The other piece to a compliance program is that you have to have effective education and training. All of our employees receive compliance training when they begin as part of their new employee orientation. We are also required to do annual compliance training, and that will actually be at next month's staff meeting. So at our full staff meetings, we will do annual compliance training. We also, of course, offer training to providers on a variety of issues, and one of the things that we have as a goal for compliance this year is to survey our providers and find out from them what trainings would they like us to offer on some of these issues. Effective lines of communication. So that's what Shelley was just talking about in terms of having a published hotline number. So we have a 24-hour hotline number that's monitored by an external vendor. People can report anonymously through that number if they wish. They don't have to, but they can report anonymously. It's a 24/7 number. And then those reports are forwarded to me, and we follow up as appropriate. And then we also make sure that everyone in the organization understands that we have a no retaliation policy. Anybody in the organization that has a compliance concern, either about a smoky practice or a provider practice, understands that they can report that without fear of any kind of retaliation being taken against them. In terms of our enforcement of standards and disciplinary guidelines, that's another key element that OIG requires. We have to have very consistent standards in how we discipline employees for any compliance violations. One of those areas would be around privacy and security breaches. It's one of the easiest things that we can have happen at Smokey, that somebody inadvertently sends an email that contains PHI to the wrong email address or something like that. So we have a very robust and consistent system for how we address that. You'll see on page 15 and 16, we've got some bullet points of the factors that would be considered when making decisions about how to discipline an employee. And then, of course, we have internal monitoring, we have audits, investigation, and risk identification. So the monitoring is an ongoing thing that the departments are constantly doing. That's a self-monitoring by departments. An audit would be if I, as the compliance officer or the risk manager or Brian or Christina had a concern about a particular department or practice at Smoky, we could order an audit and we could ask either our risk manager or we could hire an external entity to come in and do an audit and say, you know, we're concerned about this particular function. We want somebody to come in and audit and look at that. And, you know, the annual finance audit that we have every year would be an example of that. That's not really based on a concern, it's a requirement. That's the type of audit that we can have done. In terms of prevention and detection, we have 5 different units at Smoky that assist in that effort. So again, I mentioned earlier our contract performance unit. These are our team that go out and do the routine monitoring of providers. And this is required under our contract with DHHS that we have staff that go out and do routine monitoring of providers. When they're out there, they're using a tool that's been developed by the state that has, you know, very specific things for them to look at, and they report back if they find out, if they discover any issues of fraud, abuse, or other issues. We also have a credentialing unit, and Brian was talking about that. That's where we're screening our providers before they ever get into the system. We have our program integrity unit, and they are specifically devoted to fraud and abuse. So as we get allegations of potential Medicaid fraud, this unit looks at those. We have a grievance and incident team, and this is the team that responds to all those complaints that we receive. So we receive complaints either about Smoky staff or about provider staff, and this team investigates those grievances or refers them for a full investigation and resolves those with the family or consumer. And then we have our system performance team, which is part of QIM, and they are sort of our quality assurance, quality management team that are doing the ongoing audits and gathering statistics and compiling all these 8 million reports that you guys got. So, if we identify an issue, we're required under our compliance plan and under our OIG guidance to develop a specific written response and remediation to whatever issue we've identified. So if we have an issue, we will have to develop an internal corrective action plan to address it. I have a section here on privacy and security just because it's such a huge part of what we do. I think I mentioned earlier that we have a privacy officer and a security officer, and those are both really huge functions. Our privacy officer is responsible for reviewing all our privacy policies, answering questions from staff about, you know, can I share this information? Can I not share this information? Looking at our agreements with other vendors to make sure they meet HIPAA requirements. And then our security officer is looking at very similar things from the perspective of, is our MIS system secure? What have we done to make sure that our computer system, our hardware and software, and the whole system is secure? So those are both really important components of our compliance plan. And then at the end, I talk about the program monitoring and evaluation. So we have to have the annual compliance report, and you all will get that sometime in the next quarter. We have to, under the federal law, we have to do annual risk assessments. We have to do a general risk assessment. We have to do a security risk assessment. And so Charlie Berry and George Scott and myself are working on the security risk assessment right now, and that's where we're looking at our computer system and identifying any potential breach risk areas. And then in terms of annual review, we'd ask that you approve this plan on an annual basis, but acknowledge that it's a living, breathing document. It's a flexible document. We may need to make changes in response to changes in the law. So we just ask that you approve this on an annual basis, and I think what I'm going to ask of this committee is that you would recommend to the full board approval of the compliance plan. There's some attachments. As I mentioned, you have the compliance committee charter. There's a work plan, and we'll talk about that in closed session. And then there's a section at the back on all of the potential applicable laws and compliance areas, and you will see that Smoky has a lot of laws and compliance areas that we have to address and deal with. So this is why it's also complicated. And since we've gone live and we're a $350 million organization, we now have a much more robust compliance plan. So that is what I would request.
Okay.
Any other questions about the Tracy about compliance?
Tracy, you are the compliance officer.
I make a motion that the executive committee approve this, and present it to the,
Recommend it to the board.
recommend it to the board.
Steve, Ed made a motion, and Michael seconded. Any other discussion?
Good luck.
Okay. And good luck. All in favor of the motion to recommend this to the full board, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Tracy.
It's like the bank thing,
What
boy.
you wanting to read?
The compliance is the biggest part of the bank, isn't it?
It has to be approved.
And the compliance will be the biggest part of it.
It's gonna be one of the biggest part of it.
There'll be a staff, there'll be a full-blown, in 3 years, there'll be a full-blown, it won't be just Tracy, there'll be a.
Army.
Then Army.
Yeah, the Army.
Pass it to
If
Fred.
they're as smart as her,
We just call it the insurance princess of internal affairs.
That's right.
Maven.
Really good, Fred.
Tracy's on finance.
That's good.
Internal affairs Maven.
I want one of the t-shirts when you get them.
We're part of the Princess Club.
All right, moving right along. Okay, County Commissioner Advisory Board update. Michael?
Yes, Brian and Shelley and I met and reviewed the plan for our first.
Michael, would you please speak up so I could hear? I'm sorry.
Yes, Shelley and Brian and I met earlier this week to review our plans for the first County Commissioner Advisory Board meeting, which will take place at the County Commissioner Association retreat in August. Our plan is for that meeting to be on Saturday of the retreat. It will be from 11:30 to 2. And the basic agenda, and I'm just going to hit the high spots, is for us to do an overview for the county commissioners who are participating. And Shelley has been communicating with the county managers, asking them for a list of their county commissioners who will participate. And during that meeting, we'll do an overview of what the role of this advisory committee is, what they've been tasked to do by the legislature, what Smokey does, and then to look at the history of the legislation that essentially, if you remember back when Tracy did an overview at our retreat that she and Brian had kind of jointly put together, there'll be a lot of that kind of history with a few things taken out, a few things added. Brian's going to do that piece. We'll also look at the piece on how these folks want to meet, whether they want to meet as a group, or whether they want to meet within their regions, whether they want to meet in conjunction with their COGS or in a separate function, and let them vote on that. That'll probably generate a lot of discussion right there and take up some time. They'll have lunch at that meeting also, and all this has to take place between 11:30 and 2, so we're going to be meeting pretty fast and furious. But that's the outline of what's going to take place. I don't know how much more detail you want than that, but that's the broad picture of what's going to
What
happen.
day was it on?
Oh, and Tracy was there too, I'm sorry. I forgot
Saturday.
Tracy was in on
Saturday.
some of this discussion also.
I'm just really excited that we were able to work with Patrice Rossler with the association. As you know, one of our concerns is always how to get people together for that kind of a large meeting, and Patrice graciously allowed us to use time during the association meeting to have our kickoff luncheon, and she actually will either herself or have staff participate just so they can hear what we're doing. She was very interested in that. The first meeting is really going to be orientation and sort of logistical discussions, as Michael said, about how they would like to organize themselves for meetings. We have given them the option of doing regional meetings every quarter, knowing that at least twice a year, they would come together as a group, and one of those opportunities would be to have some time during our annual board retreat to meet with the board. I have sent, as soon as we talked with Patrice, we've sent several emails to all the county managers, giving them the date and time range, and I am starting now to get information back from each of the counties regarding their designee. One of the things we've done is we've also invited county managers to participate, so that we have that continuity and continue to build our relationship with the county managers. So we're really excited about the opportunity we have to meet, especially during the annual conference for the association. And I really appreciate Michael doing so much work on this. And we did have a good meeting the other day, and while we'll continue to get information out as we collect the names of the designees. So I have been in constant conversation and with the county manager, so they know that this is, on their horizon.
That's all we do.
Okay. Okay. Our next item is a closed session pursuant.
Brian, sorry, I was going to ask you a quick question. Are you, and I apologize for not being able to come over today, but are we going to mention anything about the proposed save the date for our birthday celebration?
You sure can. I think it's the Friday before that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
We're going to, and we'll just mention it at the board meeting, we're gonna throw a party for ourselves for our 2 years on the waiver. Have a legislative luncheon, have important people there.
Me and Rick.
You and Rick lead the way to the sandwich line.
What day is that?
It's,
Friday, August 15th.
yeah, so that's that Friday, which people should be in town for the Asheville thing,
Yeah, I
right?
can be there.
Huh?
Well, I can't be there. A lot of people,
Okay.
my place full.
All right, next item is the closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143, 382, 11A, to consult with attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege concerning matters in litigation and to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C, 126.1, or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. Please, can we repeat that?
Motion going closed session.
Okay, wait a second. Second. Is there a third? Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. You go in closed session.